James Madison has often been called the father of the Constitution because his rough draft of the Virginia Plan ultimately became the Constitution, and has also been called the father of nullification based on his Virginia Resolution of 1798. What is nullification? Today it's morphed into sanctuary cities, counties, and states. What are those? Those are jurisdictions at an inferior level that nullify or pass laws that require local officials not to participate in federal law. Is that legal? Is that what his idea was? Let's take a look at this. James Madison and the understanding of nullification. Let's get into this. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Edge. This is Dusty Friday here at the mic, and today we're talking about nullification. Brief word from the sponsors of this show: Joyful Sentiment, beautiful custom jewelry, and Etsy shop. Links are down in the description. Take a look at that. You'll love them. Nullification is so important today because the federal government has got reach that so far it's dangerous in what it does. And we almost have to pass these laws that literally say the local municipality or the local jurisdiction, whether it's a state or a county, will not participate in federal law. Is that legal? People have often turned to James Madison as the architect and the original founder of the nullification idea. In 1797, the federal government under President John Adams had passed a couple of laws called the Alien and Sedition Acts, the Alien Act and the Sedition Act. They were terrible acts. One of them gave the president sweeping powers over legal aliens, legal immigrants trying to gain citizenship. And the other one literally curtailed the freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, the freedom of assembly. 3 of the big 5 in the First Amendment. Remember, it's speech, assembly, press, religion, and free exercise of religion thereof, and the right to redress the government. Ooh, I had to think there for just a second. Right to redress the government, actually it was 4. The right to redress the government, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly were curtailed under the Sedition Act. Those were not allowed by the federal government. Wildly unconstitutional, we would all agree. But at the time, some of the states did not agree. James Madison authored a resolution in Virginia, in the assembly there. This was in 1798, and in it he talked about and opened up the concept of nullification of federal laws. And what did that mean? Let's take a look at this. We'll read a couple of excerpts here. So excerpt number 1 says, this is actually from the 1798 resolution from Virginia, that this assembly, meaning the Virginia Assembly, doth explicitly and peremptorily declare that it views the powers of the federal government as resulting from the compact, meaning the Constitution, to which the states are parties, as limited by the plain sense and interpretation the instrument constituting the compact, as no further valid than that they are authorized by the grants enumerated in that compact, and that in case of a deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted by the said compact, the states who are parties thereto have the right and are duty bound to interpose for arresting the progress of evil and maintaining their respective limits. So right there he says, okay, number 1, states are party members to the Constitution. That is absolutely established in that. And later we find that Madison modifies this idea just a smidge, but generally the states are the party members. They're the ones that get to ratify new amendments. They're the ones that have to ratify unanimously to join the Constitution. States, people go, oh, well, they changed the ratification process. No, they didn't. Every state had to ratify the Constitution if it wanted to join. It took 9 to get started. We then quickly went to 12. Rhode Island was a holdout for a long time. It finally joined, and from that day to this, all 50 states have had to join. If Puerto Rico wants to become a state, or I forget the other territory we have that's looking to become a state, but if Puerto Rico wants to become a state, in state convention, they will have, in state ratifying convention, they will have to ratify the Constitution. That's the way that works. So it says that the states are parties to the Constitution, that the Constitution limits the power of the federal government, and when there is a deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of powers not granted by the Constitution, the states are duty-bound to interpose to arrest the progress of evil. That's what it says. They are to interpose. Now, that today has been interpreted to mean they are to make laws contrary to the same. Let's go on and read a little bit more of what this says. That the General Assembly doth particularly protest against the palpable and alarming infractions of the Constitution in the two late cases of the, quote, Alien and Sedition Acts passed at the last session of Congress, the first of which exercises a power nowhere delegated to the federal government and which, by uniting legislative and judicial powers to those of the executive, subverts the general principle of free government, as well as the particular organization and positive provisions of the federal Constitution. And the other, so he says the first act, the Alien Act, unites judicial and legislative power in the executive branch, and the Constitution clearly divided those powers, which it did. That Alien Act, the president was how do they say it? The president was judge, jury, and executioner on legal aliens. These are not illegal. These are legal aliens immigrating here, seeking citizenship. It goes on to talk about the other one, and the other of which acts exercises in like manner a power not delegated by the Constitution, but on the contrary, expressly and positively forbidden by one of the amendments thereto, a power which more than any other ought to produce universal law, blah, 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 blah. So it says the Sedition Act clearly and palpably goes against the First Amendment to the Constitution. So they established that. They've already said it's their job to interpose. Now let's see what they actually are going to do about it. That the good people of this Commonwealth, having ever felt and continuing to feel a most sincere affection for their brethren of the other states, the truest anxiety for establishing and perpetuating the Union of all, and the most scrupulous fidelity to that Constitution, which is the pledge of mutual friendship and the instrument of mutual happiness. The General Assembly doth solemnly appeal to the like dispositions of the other states in confidence that they will concur with this Commonwealth, meaning Virginia, in declaring, as it does hereby declare, that the acts aforesaid are unconstitutional, and the necessary and proper measure will be taken by each, meaning by each of the states, for cooperating with this state in maintaining the authorities, rights, and liberties referred to the states respectively or to the people. So they said, we hope the other states will join us in saying this law is unconstitutional. By the way, of the colonies that were then established, and it was, by the time they did this, I forget the actual number, it was up to 14 or 15 or 16. Only one joined in saying, yep, you're right, that was Kentucky. All the other states said, what, are you nuts? You're a state. You can't decide if laws are unconstitutional. Well, no, I'm sorry. The states are party members. They can decide if the laws are unconstitutional, but they can't pass laws counteracting them. Our understanding today of sanctuary cities and states by James Madison would be wrong. And here is the evidence of that. Let's jump to a letter that Madison wrote to a man named Edward Everett, August the 28th of 1830. James Madison wrote this letter in response to a debate that happened in January of 1830 in the Senate of the United States between Daniel Webster and Robert C. Haynes. Daniel Webster, as in like Webster's Dictionary, senator from Massachusetts. Robert C. Haynes, senator from South Carolina. It was it started off as a debate over public lands, and morphed into a debate over a tariff designed to impinge evil upon the South, and then morphed into a debate over slavery. Daniel Webster obviously against slavery, Robert C. Haynes in favor of slavery. So talking about Robert C. Haynes was in favor of nullification, and Daniel Webster was not. South Carolina ended up passing a law against the tariff that was imposed on the South. South Carolina just said, we're not going to participate. In response to that, James Madison wrote a letter to Edward Everett talking about what nullification is. Keep in mind, Madison was in a southern state, was in Virginia. And so he's going to write about what it means to dissent and to nullify a law. So this is Madison to Edward Everett, April 28th, 1830, talking about what kind of government do we have? Is it a consolidated national government formed by the people as a group, or is it hold on, I got to see what the actual word is. It's either consolidated, or is it a confederated federalist government formed by the states? What type of government do we have? If the states formed that government, then they can nullify. If the people form the government, they can't. Here's what Madison says. I am aware of the delicacy of the task in some respects, and the difficulty in every respect of doing full justice to it. But having in more than one instance complied with a like request from other friendly quarters, I do not decline a sketch of the views which I have been led to take in the doctrine of the doctrine in question, meaning this doctrine of nullification, as well as some others connected with them, and the grounds from which it appears that the proceedings of Virginia have been misconceived by those who have appealed to them. Talking about the resolution of 1798. He goes, when Virginia did that, lots of people have appealed to that, but they have not understood the doctrine. In order to understand the true character of the Constitution of the United States, the error, not uncommon, must be avoided of viewing it through the medium either of a consolidated government, meaning a government by the people at large and non-negotiable by the states, or a confederated government, meaning a federal government by the states and answerable solely to them. So he says the error must be avoided of viewing it through the medium of either a consolidated or a confederated government, whilst it is neither the one nor the other, but a mixture of both. This is key. And having in no model the similitudes and analogies applicable to other systems of government, it must, more than any other, be its own interpreter according to its text and the facts of the case. So Madison is saying, we didn't give you a pure democracy or a pure republic. We gave you a mixture of both. Therefore, it must be its own interpreter. We can't go, well, democracies are run this way, well, republics are run that way, and try to go down those lines. We have to blend the two. Here's what Madison says, again, on this subject being formed by how the Constitution was formed. So, talking about this, he has a couple of points. Number one, it, meaning the federal government, the Constitution, so forth, it was formed not by the governments of the component states as the federal government for which it was substituted was formed, nor was it formed by a majority of the people of the United States as a single community in the manner of a consolidated government. So it is not a democracy, but it was not a pure republic like the Articles of Confederation. It was formed by the states, that is, by the people in each of the states, acting in their highest sovereign capacity, and formed consequently by the same authority which formed the state constitutions. He's going to develop this idea further. He says, look, the federal constitution has the same power as state constitutions. He says, being thus derived from the same source as the constitutions of the states, it has within each state the same authority as the constitution of the state. and is as much a constitution in the strict sense of the term within its prescribed sphere as the constitutions of the states are within their respective spheres, but with this obvious and essential difference, that being a compact among the states in their highest sovereign capacity and constituting the people thereof one people for certain purposes, it cannot be altered or annulled at the will of the states individually, as the constitution of a state may be at its individual will. So he says right there, you as an individual state cannot annul federal law. Going on, Madison talks about the supremacy clause in the Constitution. He says, those who have denied or doubted the supremacy of the judicial power of the United States and denounce at the same time a nullifying power in a state seem not to have sufficiently averted to the utter inefficiency of a supremacy in a law of the land without a supremacy in the exposition and execution of the law. So he says, how can you deny that the Constitution, how can you say the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, but then deny its power to supersede state and county law? Nor to the destruction of all equipoise between the federal government and the state governments, if, whilst the functionaries of the federal government are directly or indirectly elected by and responsible to the states, and the functionaries of the state are in their appointments and responsibilities wholly independent from the United States. No constitutional control of any sort belong to the United States over the states. So he says, look, how can you say that the states can do their own thing when the people who are in the federal government are responsible to the states? Okay, by the way, we changed that, and that was a mistake to make senators directly elected. I know why they changed it. We can get into that later, but it ended up being a mistake under the long term. Under such an organization, it is evident that it would be in the power of the states individually to pass unauthorized laws and to carry them into complete effect, anything in the Constitution and laws of the United States to the contrary notwithstanding. This would be a nullifying power in its plenary character, and whether it had its final effect through the legislative, executive, or judicial organ of the state would be equally fatal to the constituted relation between the two governments. So he says, look, if you say that states can absolutely nullify at any time any federal law, that is going to destroy the relationship here, and that makes no respect to the supremacy clause. Madison goes on to explain, should the provisions of the Constitution as here reviewed be found not to secure the government and rights of the states. So now he's going to say, look, you can declare a law unconstitutional, but if the government, the federal government, starts to get wildly out of control, should the provisions of the Constitution here reviewed be found not to secure the government and the rights of the states. So if the Constitution does not limit the federal government and secure the right of the states against usurpations and abuses on the part of the United States, the final result, okay, here it is, this is his writing, the final result within the purview of the Constitution lies in an amendment of the Constitution according to a process applicable by the states. That is the Article 5 Convention. Here Madison says, if the Constitution is not able to control the federal government properly, and if there are usurpations by the federal government, the last resort within the Constitution is an Article 5 Convention of States. It almost sounds, he does not explicitly say this, it almost sounds like Madison is saying, I wonder why we haven't had one of these already. Later on, here Madison goes on to describe, once you've tried that, once the system is dying and usurpations at the federal level are absolutely out of control, and you have tried to do an Article 5 convention and it still is out of control, there's one thing left. Here's what he says. And in the event of a failure of every constitutional resort, remember, the last resort for the states was an Article 5 convention, the last constitutional resort. And in the event of a failure of every constitutional resort, an accumulation of usurpations and abuses, rendering passive obedience and non-resistance a greater evil than resistance and revolution, there can remain but one resort, the last of all, an appeal from the canceled obligations of the constitutional compact to original rights and the law of self-preservation. This is the ultima ratio under all governments, whether consolidated, confederated, or a compound of both, and it cannot be doubted that a single member of the Union, in the extremity supposed, but in that only, would have a right as an extra or ultra-constitutional right to make the appeal. In other words, he goes, guys, the last resort is to self-preservation, the ultimate right of the people to throw off their current government and create a new one. Remember what they said? Governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. He says here, it needs to be to a point where passive obedience and non-resistance are a greater evil than resistance and revolution. This is major language. And he says, I don't think a single state could ever make that appeal. Now he's going to talk about if a state nullifies a federal law, how this is backwards to the way the Constitution was made. This brings us to the expedient lately advanced, which claims for a single state a right to appeal against an exercise of power by the government of the United States decided by the state to be unconstitutional, to the parties to the constitutional compact. So in other words, if one state nullifies a law, it nullifies it for that state, but the other states, as party members to the Constitution, are equally affected, because now the law is not equally adjudicated. It is now differentially adjudicated. The decision of the state to have effect of nullifying the act of the government of the United States, unless the decisions of the states be reversed by 3/4 of the parties. The distinguished names and high authorities which appear to have assented and given a practical scope to this doctrine entitle it to a respect which it might be difficult otherwise to feel for it. If the doctrine were to be understood as requiring the 3/4 of the states to sustain, instead of that portion to reverse the decision of the appealing state, the decision to be without effect during the appeal, it would be sufficient to remark that this extra constitutional course might well give way to that marked out by the Constitution, which authorizes 2/3 of the states to institute, 3/4 to effectuate an amendment to the Constitution establishing a permanent rule, the highest authority in place of irregular precedent of the Constitution only. So here he's going, look, if the way the states went about it is to seek 3/4 of the states to assent to one state claiming a law is unconstitutional and 3/4 to agree to that, and then the laws change, he goes, well, we've already got that. That's called the amendment process. That's not what you're trying to do. You're trying to have one state make a law nullified and the law of no effect until 3/4 of the states reverse that decision. But it is understood that the nullifying doctrine imports that decision of the state. It imports that the decision of the state is to be presumed valid and that it overrules the law of the United States unless overruled by 3/4 of the states. Can more be necessary to demonstrate the inadmissibility of such a doctrine than that it puts in the power of the smallest fraction over 1/4 of the United States, that is of, at the time it was 7, today we would say 38, states out of 24, today we would say 50, to give the law and even the Constitution to 17, we would again say 38. Each of the states having as parties of the Constitution an equal right, with each of the 7 to expound it and to insist on the exposition, that the 7 might in particular instance be right and the 17 be wrong is more than possible. But to establish a positive and permanent rule giving such a power to such a minority over such a majority would overturn the first principle of free government and practice necessary to overturn government itself. So here Madison is saying, look, one state cannot overturn the law and then require 3/4 of the state to reinstate that law. One state can protest, and 3/4 can join and overturn the law. Do you see how that's a difference there? The question is, which direction is it going? Are 3/4 of the states required to impinge on the one, or are 3/4 of the states required to assent to the one and impinge on the feds? That's what Madison's saying. The Article 5 States Convention process is 3/4 assenting to overturn a law, not one state assenting to overturn a law. It cannot be doubted, disputed, or refuted that Madison here clearly was against sanctuary cities, counties, and states. Clearly was against. Yes, states can decide if the law is unconstitutional. They clearly cannot just flat out override the law of the land, being unconstitutional notwithstanding. Madison's ultimate point is, and his ultimate position is so clearly understood. Yes, a state can determine if a law is unconstitutional. Yes, a state can enter protest of a law. No, a state cannot invalidate the law, even if it is unconstitutional in the eyes of that state. Its job, the state's job, is to rally support by the other states for the unconstitutionality and enact either an amendment by Congress or an amendment by state convention to overturn the congressional law. That is his point. It is beyond clear from this letter, and it cannot be mistaken. I hope this brings a little bit of clarity. I have to say, Madison is my favorite founding father. But on this, I think I disagree slightly with him, which bothers me. I am a little more leaning towards the favorability of sanctuary cities and states, even for those sanctuary states that do drugs and immigration. Because Second Amendment to me is pretty important, and I'd like to see my state be a Second Amendment sanctuary. But it is a dangerous track. I lean favorable towards sanctuary cities, counties, and states. Madison did not, and that is the big difference. I hope that makes a little more sense. Check out Joyful Sentiment for beautiful jewelry, especially at this Christmas time. As we're going into Christmas time, she's got a discount going on for the month of November in 2021. If you're watching during that time, go check it out. It's beautiful custom jewelry for that girl in your life, your wife, your daughter, your mother, your girlfriend, your fiance. Wonderful custom jewelry. Check out Joyful Sentiment. Links are in the description below. Thanks, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you for watching that video. If you like that, remember to give me a thumbs up and subscribe right up here. For other great content, take a look at our recommended video over here and see our playlist right over there. Remember to go to www.dustyfriday.com for great memes, news, videos, and my podcast available on all major platforms. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next one.